The village of Greystone had always been cloaked in an air of mystery. Tucked away between fog-covered hills and dense forests, it was a place where time seemed to stand still, and the past lingered like a shadow over its cobblestone streets. The villagers whispered about strange happenings, people who vanished without a trace, odd occurrences at night, and the eerie presence of Horace Grimwald, the Dollmaker. But few knew the true depth of his secrets, or how they had intertwined with the fate of the town itself. Horace had not always been the Dollmaker. In fact, once upon a time, he had been a simple man, a carpenter, skilled with his hands, but unremarkable in every other way. He lived a quiet, solitary life in a distant town, far from Greystone. But one night, many years ago, a mysterious traveler arrived at his doorstep, seeking shelter from a storm. The traveler was an old woman, her clothes tattered and her eyes weary. Despite her frail appearance, there was something unnerving about her, a presence that made the air feel heavy. Out of kindness, Horace invited her in, offering food and warmth by the fire. As they spoke, the old woman revealed herself to be more than she appeared. She was a witch, cursed with a terrible burden. She had once created lifelike dolls, beautiful and perfect in every way. But in her arrogance, she had sought to imbue them with life. The magic backfired, and her creations turned on her, taking her soul and leaving her a hollow shell of herself. Desperate to be free of her fate, she offered Horace a choice. Either she would bestow upon him her knowledge, allowing him to continue her dark work, or he could face the same fate she had suffered. In a moment of fear and temptation, Horace chose the former. From that night on, Horace Grimwald was no longer an ordinary man. He was bound to the craft of creating dolls, dolls that required a terrible price to remain perfect. Each one demanded a soul. As time passed, Horace's own soul began to wither, and the only way to stave off his own demise was to continue the work, trapping the souls of others in his creations. The witch had not just given him her craft, she had passed on her curse. And so, Horace wandered from town to town, leaving a trail of hollow-eyed dolls in his wake until he came to Greystone. The town, isolated and largely forgotten by the outside world, was the perfect place to settle and continue his dark craft in secret. Greystone itself had a history shrouded in tragedy. Centuries ago, it had been a prosperous village, but over time, a dark presence seemed to settle over it. It was said that the town was built on cursed land, where ancient rituals had once been performed to appease spirits that were never meant to be disturbed. The townsfolk had long forgotten the details, but the land had not. Strange things always happened in Greystone. The crops failed more often than they should. The winters were harsh and unforgiving, and every so often, a villager would simply disappear. No one dared to question why. They simply carried on, too afraid to look deeper into the darkness that surrounded their town. Perhaps in some way, they knew that they were all destined to become part of that darkness, eventually. Horace's arrival in Greystone went unnoticed at first, but over time, the villagers began to realize that things had changed. People vanished more frequently. Those who remained seemed to age quicker, their faces lined with sorrow and fear. And yet, the dolls in Horace's shop never aged. They stood pristine, perfect, and ever watchful. There were rumors about the Dollmaker, whispers in the village about the strange way his dolls seemed to resemble people from the town. Many dismissed it as coincidence, but others believed there was something far darker at work. Anna Mayfield was the only child of Grace and Samuel Mayfield, a quiet, unassuming couple who had lived in Greystone their entire lives. Samuel was a blacksmith, and Grace ran the local bakery. They had heard the rumors about the Dollmaker, of course. Everyone had. But, like many of the townsfolk, they chose to ignore them. After all, life in Greystone was hard enough. without dwelling on the strange happenings that lurked in the shadows. Little Anna Mayfield was one of those children who couldn't resist the allure of the Dollmaker's creations. For her 7th birthday, she begged her parents for one of his dolls. Hesitant but unable to refuse her excitement, they purchased a doll for her. A girl with golden curls, dressed in a soft blue gown. But what struck Anna most were the doll's eyes. They were just like hers. Grace had been uneasy about buying Anna a doll from Horace Grimwald's shop. They had given in, thinking it would be harmless. How could a doll hurt anyone? It was just a toy. That night, Anna proudly placed the doll on her shelf, tucking it in for the night, as if it were real. As the house settled into quiet, the ticking of the clock, the only sound, Anna drifted off to sleep. But somewhere in the silence, there was another sound. Soft, almost imperceptible. The faint click, click, click of tiny footsteps on the wooden floor. Anna stirred but didn't wake. The footsteps grew louder, more deliberate, until they stopped at the foot of her bed. Slowly, her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the darkness. Her heart froze as she saw the doll standing there, its glass eyes gleaming in the moonlight.
Anna!
A soft voice whispered, though no one else was in the room.
Anna!
Panicking, she blinked hard, sure she was dreaming. But when she opened her eyes again, the doll was still there, now closer, its tiny hand outstretched as if reaching for her. Anna screamed, kicking the doll away. It fell to the floor with a dull thud, its head turning toward her even as it lay on its back. She ran to her parents' room, trembling. But when they returned to her room, the doll was back on the shelf, perfectly still, as though it had never moved. Her parents dismissed her terror as a nightmare, but Anna knew better. The doll wasn't just a toy, it was something more, something alive. But from the moment Anna received the doll, Grace noticed a change in her daughter. Anna became withdrawn, spending more and more time in her room, whispering to the doll as though it could respond. The lively spark in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a haunted look that Grace couldn't explain. Samuel dismissed it as childish imagination, but Grace's instincts told her something was wrong. The following week, as the doll sat on her shelf back in the box, its blank eyes seemingly following Anna's every move, Anna decided to return it. She decided she would take it to school and go to the Dollmaker's shop right after school. Her heart was pounding as she carried the doll back to the shop, the air around her growing colder with every step. When she entered the dimly lit store, Horace Grimwald was waiting behind the counter, as though he had expected her.
"You don't want her anymore?"
he asked, his voice soft, his eyes unnerving.
It moved.
Anna whispered, clutching the doll tighter, despite her fear.
It talked.
The Dollmaker's smile widened, but his eyes darkened.
"All of my dolls are special, Anna. They have a piece of life in them, a piece of someone real."
Confused and frightened, Anna asked.
What do you mean?
Horace gestured to the rows of dolls lining the shelves, each one more lifelike than the last.
"Do you recognize them?"
he asked. And as Anna looked closely, she gasped. The dolls were not just ordinary creations. They were the spitting image of people from her town, people she had seen at the market, her teacher from school, and even her neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, who had mysteriously disappeared a year ago. She looked down at the doll in her arms and felt a deep chill crawl up her spine. The golden-haired doll. It was her, a perfect replica of her, down to the faint birthmark on its wrist.
How is this possible?
The Dollmaker's smile never wavered.
"A piece of their soul goes into each one.
He explained.
In exchange for their likeness, they lose a part of themselves. Sometimes, when they've given enough, they disappear altogether." Anna's eyes widened in horror as she realized the truth. The dolls weren't just toys, they were prisons, and the people who vanished, like Mrs. Caldwell, hadn't just left town. Their souls had been trapped inside the dolls, forever bound to the Dollmaker's creations.
Desperate to escape, Anna dropped the doll on the counter, her hands shaking. "I don't want it!" she cried, turning to flee the shop. But as she reached the door, the dollmaker's voice stopped her cold.
Anna,
He said, his tone suddenly icy.
you can't leave. You're part of the collection now.
She turned to see the doll, her doll, standing on the counter, its tiny hand reaching for her once more. And behind it, the other dolls on the shelves began to stir, their eyes following her, their faces frozen in eerie smiles. Before she could scream, before she could even take another step, she felt a sharp tug, like invisible strings pulling her back. The room spun, and everything went dark. When Anna's parents returned to the dollmaker's shop the next day, worried that she hadn't come home, they found only Horace Grimwald standing behind the counter, smiling softly. On the shelf behind him, among his lifelike creations, was a new doll. A small girl with golden curls and a blue dress, her glass eyes gleaming in the faint light. For now, though, Horace continued to smile, handing the doll back to Anna's parents with a cryptic warning.
Take good care of her. She's special.
Unbeknownst to Grace, Anna was not the first child to experience the dollmaker's creations, nor would she be the last. Greystone's fate was tied to Horace Grimwald's curse, and the town itself was a wellspring of restless souls. The land was cursed, and its people were the fuel that kept the curse alive. Every doll in Horace's shop represented a person who had vanished, each one a reminder that no one in Greystone could escape their destiny. Horace Grimwald was merely the caretaker of the curse, a puppet himself, trapped in a cycle of soul-stealing and creation that he could never break. The town would continue to feed his dark work, its people forever entwined in the web of magic and death that had bound Greystone for centuries. But Anna's arrival at his shop had stirred something in him. She was different somehow, perhaps because of her innocence, or perhaps because the curse was reaching its end. The doll of Anna was special, just as he had said, but not because it was another creation. It was special because it marked the beginning of the end. The time was approaching when Horace would have to face the final reckoning. And when that day came, the doll of himself would awaken, and the curse would be passed on to the next unfortunate soul. Greystone would never be free, and neither would he. And as they left his shop, unaware of the dark future that awaited them, Horace Grimwald locked the door, retreating to the back of his workshop where his own doll lay waiting, its eyes gleaming with the knowledge that soon, very soon, it would claim him too. Food for thought. Will Greystone ever learn about the curse that plagues their town? Wonder what will happen to Horace when his own doll finally awakens. Will the curse of the Dollmaker continue? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.